Releasing Trauma is sponsored by the Global Association for Trauma Recovery. The Global Association for Trauma Recovery is a social impact organization serving as a resource for survivors and their families, dedicated to facilitating change by spreading trauma-related awareness and thus creating a more trauma-informed world. Learn more at gaftr.org. Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or a survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. With me today is Wendy Tamis Robbins, and we're going to be talking about freedom from anxiety. Wendy, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm thrilled to have you here. So many of us suffer from anxiety, so learning how to be free from it will be a godsend, let me tell you. But before we dive into our topic, I always like to have our guests start out with telling us a little bit about their story. So why don't you tell us about you?
Sure. So my story started when I was 6 years old, and that's when I had my first panic attack. And it was right after my parents had bought a new refrigerator, and they put the big box, the cardboard box that refrigerator comes they put it in the living room for the kids to play in. And I was really the only one who took the bait and found myself really hiding in that box more than playing. I was really escaping from the volatility and kind of the chaos that was going on outside of those cardboard walls, because of my mother's own untreated mental illness and addiction and things that were going on when I was a kid. So once they threw that box away, I started to build mental walls, like emotional walls, and create that box in my head to really protect myself from that environment that I didn't really know how to deal with. I wasn't equipped to deal with as a kid. And so that really morphed into things like people pleasing and perfectionism and being hypervigilant. And, all of that just feeds into the anxiety as it's growing. And so as that anxiety grew, the walls of that box grew. And over time, the perfectionism, things like that helped me look fine from the outside because I was doing well in school and got myself into an Ivy League college and became a lawyer, and all of these things that I thought, would make the anxiety go away, really just made it worse. And so reaching one of my several rock bottoms, I discovered that safe place that I had tried to create and protect myself from all of that anxiety and fear really had become a prison. So that's really where the book was born, trying to find my way out of that prison and ultimately find freedom from my disorders.
Well, because going to college and law school is definitely anxiety free. Yeah, that's the way to escape. No, I can't imagine being, what'd you say, 6 years old and having your first panic attack. That's just crazy.
Yeah.
To imagine a child that young. Trying to think that's the age of my youngest granddaughter, and I just can't imagine her having an actual full-on panic attack. It's just too young. But I understand why, having to deal with the childhood trauma that you had to deal with, and the intergenerational trauma that you had to deal with.
Mhm.
It's a lot for a little kid to take in.
Yeah, it really disrupts your sense of safety and stability, which is really so much of what children are looking for, right?
Yeah.
In predictability, a lot of that was a lack of being able to predict not only the emotions of my parents, but the emotional availability to me that I had access to. It was, and then it always became, because it's looking through the lens of a child who just starts to say, well, what's my role in all of this? And that's where the shame and the guilt really is rooted deeply. It's planted very early. So those roots are deep.
Yeah, maybe if I was a better kid, or I didn't ask for so much, or I kept my room clean, or, the things that go through our heads, much like us as adults doing the same thing. Those, like you said, those roots get seated deep. So, you're growing up and you've created this cardboard box in your mind, kind of a place to escape your safe spot. How and when did you finally decide it was time to get rid of the box?
So it was really, I had this epiphany in my first marriage. We were away on vacation and I couldn't leave the hotel room. And we were in, beautiful Park City. We were skiing, and I just couldn't get vulnerable enough to get out there with my husband, because I didn't really ski at the time. And it was really going to be me learning, essentially. And, something very simple, like just getting out there and having a good time in this beautiful place with your husband who, loves you. And I still couldn't, I was paralyzed with fear that I would be, that I will look less than, and that I would be, unlovable, essentially, look unlovable, present him with an opportunity to find somebody else. And, all of these this fear of abandonment, essentially. And so he left the room and I stayed in there and was just crying and looked at those walls. And it just dawned on me what I was doing to myself. Like, really, I felt like I was being torn apart at the seams, because I wanted to be out there so badly, but I couldn't. I was living like there were like two different people living inside of my body. And I realized then that I was in a prison, essentially a mental prison that I had created, and was metaphorically in this, hotel room that looked just like one. And that's really when I decided I would either have to live the rest of my life like that, or I would have to decide to find my way out, not knowing what that looked like, what that journey would look like, or what it would look like on the other side. Really no guarantee of even ever being better, whatever that meant. But really just diving in and accepting that to be my path, if there was any way out at all, that I was going to have to find it.
So I can completely understand being a prisoner of your mind, or in your mind. And, I think for you not going out of that hotel room, the fear of bursting this illusion of perfection that you've created for yourself, was terrifying. It sounds like.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what did you do? How did you decide to, or not how did you decide to, but I mean, just how did you do it? How did you take control of this mental disorder that so many of us suffer with, that, a lot of us have to medicate for, and we just can't control it a lot of times.
Yeah. So at the time I had dabbled with, psychiatrists and medication, and they really weren't working for me. The medication gave me more anxiety than it relieved, essentially. At the beginning, it was necessary because my thoughts were so out of control. So, whatever you're using as I support all of it, because we all have different journeys, right? But so in that moment, I took a really hard look at the people in my life and whether or not they were carrying buckets, how I say helping me carry buckets of water to put the fire out, or are they fanning the flames? And essentially, I felt like that relationship with my husband at the time, that was kind of fanning the flames for me. So I asked for a divorce. I left that relationship. And then I started exposure therapy just on my own, just knowing that because I had become agoraphobic at that point. I think it was after that trip, actually, that it got worse and worse. And that's really when I made the decision that I couldn't live my life like that anymore. So just leaving the house, it starts with small steps for sure. But then I booked a trip with a church group and I went, which was just kind of unheard of for me to travel alone, and started doing things like that to really retrain my brain to understand that I would live through a panic attack. I could function with the anxiety and move through it, and start to see that the catastrophizing that I was doing in my mind in building these things that my brain believed to be true memories could be replaced with actually doing these activities and not having that catastrophe happen, having a good outcome. And so that ball starts rolling down the hill, and it starts to get, you get more confident in those spaces, understanding that even if the anxiety comes, I can say yes to this and move through it, and then actually move past it, understanding that there's no way around it. There's no way to avoid it anymore, that I'm going to need to move through it and realize that I survived it on the other side.
I love that, having panic and anxiety can definitely make somebody agoraphobic, or, at the very least, just very reclusive. I have a daughter who has emetophobia, which is fear of vomiting. And that triggers her anxiety when she feels like she's nauseous. And then, of course, the anxiety makes her feel more nauseous. And it's this big vicious circle. And she has missed so much school over the years because if she even thinks for a second that she's going to throw up, she won't go anywhere. A lot of times I can't even get her to just leave the bathroom. And so that's something that she's had to learn to, kind of overcome. And she still struggles with it, but she's gotten a lot better. So, that anxiety and that fear is debilitating, absolutely debilitating.
I think a big part of it, it's interesting that you say that, because I think a big part of it for most people that suffer with anxiety or something like fear of throwing up, like your daughter has, it's that we're assigning a meaning to it, right? Yeah. So it's the feeling about the feeling that is really causing the downward spiral. Like if you said to her, let's go out and see if you can throw up. Like, I want you to throw up. Do it for me, 10 minutes into our walk through the supermarket. And it would almost become like if somebody said that to me, like, let's go have a panic attack. We're going to do it. And I want to see you have the panic attack and live through it. And, almost like not making it neutral rather than having this fear, because it's more like the, what if this happens? And we really know that the world won't end if it happens, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like trying to neutralize the thing that we become so terrified of. And then it's just, it takes away the power, right? We regain or retake our power back.
Yeah, that makes sense. We get our control back because, we've kind of told the beast inside, you're no longer in control. I'm no longer afraid of you. And once that fear goes away, it just has no control over you anymore.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. It's
because our emotions, well, not our emotions, but our mental health, our mental illness issues, whatever you want to call it, mostly controls us by fear. Just like, an abuser would.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It becomes bigger than the original fear that caused the anxiety, right? Because we're always going to have a normal amount of anxiety. It's a survival instinct. And so if we're afraid of the lion that's crossing the grassy knoll toward us, of course, that's a normal sense of anxiety that we're having. But once we have, say, a panic attack in that moment and we become afraid of the panic attack, that's where you lose your control. So I think that's where you start to take it back too.
Did you do anything else? Like, I know, a lot of people I talk to, they use like journaling, meditation, yoga, those kinds of things. Did any of those tools help you at all?
Yeah. So after I did probably 10 years of that kind of exposure therapy and working through the divorce, which was very difficult, and I was still accommodating my anxiety on a daily basis. And it wasn't really until I started this book that I started a really deep meditation practice. And that was really around going back and healing my open wounds that started with that cardboard box, right? Like I had to go back to that little girl, and because I couldn't reconcile the life that I was living outwardly and the life that was going on inside of me. The two didn't make sense. So I needed to go back, and I did all of that through meditation, and would sit with that little girl. So when I identified a pain point or an open wound, I would go back and sit with that little girl at that age in that spot and basically like reparent her and ask her what she needed, ask her what she was afraid of, ask her what she was thinking. And I would sort of relive those moments. And so that's really how I talk about sometimes like how my anxiety is my superpower now, in a way that I used it to go back into my past and, like I said, heal those open wounds and even relationships that, I needed to bring or accept forgiveness, things like that. That was a lot of the work that I did that I talk about in the book. So my meditation practice became hugely important for me. And then it was really non-existent for like 20 years during this. When people told me to meditate, I fired so many psychiatrists just for suggesting that I meditate, because I'm like, clearly I'm not communicating to you well enough what's going on inside of my head. Like that's not possible for me. So I totally get it when I get that response from other people. And then yoga, my mother was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer, which most pancreatic cancers I think are. I was spinning at the time, and I started just really crying all the time on the bike. And you can't really spin and hyperventilate at this. Well, you can't spin and cry without hyperventilating, essentially, or I couldn't. So I went back to the yoga mat, and I had always had panic attacks in yoga classes and had really struggled just staying through the entire class. And so I was determined to just stay on the mat for the full hour, whether I was doing yoga or not. I was like, this was another way to just work through that panic. And I would panic and I would lay there and I would just continue to tell myself I was safe. And then each time it got better and better. And I really worked through, I think yoga can be very cathartic. It was a very mind body, like transformational space for me on that mat during a very painful period, because my mom, was the source of my anxiety in a way, but she also became my lifeline because she was the only one in my family who could really understand it on any level. So, there was this push-pull relationship there for so long. And then there was this beautiful time of forgiveness and love and gratitude, during those few months before her passing.
Wow. I'm so sorry for the loss of your mom. I don't know where I was going. I kind of lost my train of thought there for a second.
Yeah, moms will do that.
They do, because I've lost both my parents. So yeah, you kind of start thinking about that. I know where I wanted to go with the reparenting. That is such a powerful tool. To be able to go back to your younger you at various ages. And like you said, reparent yourself and help to heal those wounds. That is probably one of the strongest tools for childhood trauma that I know of.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't even know it was a thing until after I did it. I kind of, or literally just fell into it in a meditation. Yeah, I talk about that in the beginning of the book. It was when I was first asking the question, like, could I ever live without, and when I say without anxiety, I do want to be clear that I still have anxiety. I still have panic attacks. I just had a panic attack last week. But I say I'm free from them because I'm not caged by them anymore. They don't control me anymore. And there's really there, if you think you'd ever be free of all anxiety, like that's not a realistic goal. And then when you do have anxiety again, you'll think you failed. So that is definitely not the goal. But,
right.
But yeah, I was really wondering, like, where did all of this come from? What did this little girl go through? What was happening? And I just had this vision in a meditation where I like met her, and there she was. And I had like this really revelatory meditation in there with her. And that's kind of where it started. So it was really interesting sort of after the fact to learn about this whole process of reparenting. And I was like, God, I think that's just what I did. And it was kind of backwards, but yeah, it was extremely powerful. I wish honestly that I had been exposed to it earlier, by a psychiatrist. I'm sure that there's so many people out there now doing this work, and yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know about psychiatrists, but I know there are a lot of trauma coaches out there who work on healing your inner child, because it is so truly powerful. Well, Wendy, tell us about your book.
So the book started off as just a process for me to work through going on this journey. I called it a quest to figure out if I could really find freedom from anxiety. I knew that I'd need to write about it. I had always written a lot of poetry to try and process my anxiety and things as a child and adolescent. And so it started as a way to save myself. And then about halfway through the book, I kind of saw this process unfolding, and it occurred to me that I had already seen that I would be able to move beyond my disorders and live this life that I could always see from inside those walls that I had always dreamt of. And it was such an astonishing process for me that I couldn't help but want to share it with like my younger self. I had gone through the process of spending so much time with my younger self in the process of, writing my way through this journey, that I really just wrote the rest of it as a way to further document what I was going through, what my life looks like now on the other side of the box, and sort of as this gift or like a love letter to people who are going through or struggling with the same things that I had struggled with, to save some of that time that, I feel like I had lost so many years to this that, I felt like I needed to go back and sort of save those who were in the same position that I was in all those years ago.
Wow, that's amazing. I have a copy of it. I haven't started reading it yet, but it's sitting right next to the couch on my stack of stuff, so that I can read it. So I'm looking forward to it. Well, Wendy, thank you so much for joining us today and, telling us a little bit about your story and talking with me about, anxiety and how to kind of come out of our own mental prisons.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. And thanks so much for the work that you do. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And same to you. Thank you for writing the book to help others and to let others know that they're not alone and that there is a way out. How can people find you?
So my website is Wendy Tamis, Tamis, Robbins with 2 B's.com. And that's pretty much got everything. Okay. You can buy my book. I have one-on-one coaching, and I also do corporate wellness programs. And all of that information's there. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. And those, you can click right off onto those from the website. So I think that's the best place to start.
Awesome. Thank you. And listeners, you know that I'll have everything down in the show notes. Just head over to releasingtraumapodcast.com if you're listening from one of our partner stations, and pull up Wendy's show and all her contact information, link to her book. Everything will be down in the show notes for you. Well, Wendy, thank you again for joining us today. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, I had a great time. Thank you. And it was my pleasure.
And listeners, thank you as always for tuning in. We'll talk to you in the next show.